Hello, everybody. I'm Logan Crawford, and this is the award-winning TV talk show right here on Ebru Fresh Outlook. We begin today with a comprehensive look at the fight against ISIL extremists, the militant group in control of large sections of both Syria and Iraq, with a fight taking place right next door to Turkiye and just outside of Baghdad as well. The consequences of all this fighting is a humanitarian crisis. Take a look.
On the outskirts of Montevideo, locals gathered to welcome the first group of Syrian refugees to arrive in Uruguay.
I think these are people who have gone through things that we can't even imagine. So yes, I'm happy that they're here.
42 refugees, many of them adolescents and children, traveled in a convoy of buses with a police escort. They're in Uruguay thanks to an initiative by President Jose Mojica, who underscored the importance of helping the most vulnerable victims of war.
We must insist that the world moves in this direction. We can't continue with statements on human rights and later say that we support human rights if later we don't put our words into action, above all for the children.
By late afternoon, some of the refugees could be seen playing soccer on the facility's lush grounds, a stark contrast to fighting that has driven more than 3 million people to leave Syria. Uruguay has agreed to accept 120 Syrian refugees.
Okay, we are back live now, and I am joined by an illustrious panel of guests. They include Jackie Guzda, who is a doctor with Western Connecticut University. Her specialty is analyzing media, so we'll have her doing some of that today. And we have Dr. William Rosenberg from Drexel University as well, and he is a all-around genius, and he'll be talking to us about foreign affairs and politics and all the implications. Bill, I'm going to start with you since the camera is on you. What is your headline this week with the ISIL militants?
Well, first of all, I just want to call attention to the fact that you're calling them ISIL. That's one of the major distinctions that actually goes on. Many organizations tend to use the word ISIS, but ISIL is the broadening of the conflict in the sense to think about it as the Levant, the whole area from Turkey all the way around to Egypt. But besides that, I think the headline story this week is really what's going on with the U.S. and Turkey. Turkey is right now sitting with troops massed on the borders of Syria, but they're refusing to go in and aid support to the individuals who are fighting against ISIS until they reach some type of accommodation with the United States over what should be done with Assad. And I think that's a critical issue, and that's really what's going on right now, because Turkey has an army large enough to really make a major difference in this offensive, but if they're not going to fight, then it's going to be a problem.
Okay, we're going to revisit that in just a minute. Let's turn now to Jackie Guzda from Western Connecticut University. What's your headline out of ISIL this week?
It's the same thing. We need Turkey to go in there. Turkey has a border that they share with Syria. There are militants going in and out. There are goods going in and out. There are fighting weapons going in and out. We have committed to not putting boots on the ground. We have Air Force, yeah. However, I think we've seen that it's not doing much. We've got to get Turkey involved. Now, they don't want to get involved.
And that is a complex issue. We're going to talk about that more in depth. Let us turn now to our third guest, Allan Topol, who is joining us live from Washington, D.C. And Allan, what is your headline when it comes to talking about ISIL this week? What do you see as the defining event?
My headline this week is both the Obama administration and Turkey are hugely at fault in this enormous disaster in terms of people and individuals. I mean, the Obama administration, to start with, went literally for years while 200,000 people in Syria were killed, and they did nothing. They could have imposed the no-fly zone. They didn't even follow the red line of Obama. Granted, Turkey is now bears a huge amount of responsibility for what's happening right now, and Erdogan's behavior is inexcusable, but let's not put the blame solely on Turkey. The United States has blame, and the United States hasn't even well coordinated the action it's now taking. So my headline would be both U.S. and Turkey share blame for disaster that's unfolding.
Okay, Allan, we're going to talk to you about that in just a moment. Do you see this bill as a lack of leadership on the part of the Obama administration? We didn't get involved actively in the Syrian conflict. The Syrian conflict is still going on now years later, and the death toll continues to mount. And now we've got a third leg to all of this as well.
I think it's really interesting because, you know, it depends on what altitude you're flying over on this situation. It seems like, well, why didn't the U.S. do more? And it automatically then becomes, why didn't Obama do more? The reality is, if you go back 2.5 years, Obama wanted to do more, but he had a Congress that was unwilling to do it, and he had an American public that was unwilling to do it. So he would have had to go out in front of public opinion and really go against what domestic politics was all about.
But that's what a leader does.
Well, if he does, except he has to make sure that he doesn't lead too far in front, otherwise he's going to have no one backing him up. And I think ultimately what happened was the beheadings really changed the whole complexion of the situation. When we saw Americans beheaded, that really changed public opinion, and now we have 52% of the American public that's in favor of the U.S. with boots on the ground. That was never the case before.
Jackie, those were powerful images that we saw when we saw the American executed on tape. Tell me how that plays into changing the opinions of the populace of the United States.
Well, look, beheadings are nothing new. Saudi Arabia, as a country, I believe, beheaded 13 people this year. Beheadings are done in the Middle Eastern region. Now, this is the first time that we've seen it up close and personal done to ourselves, to our own citizens. I mean, think about it. Assad has killed how many? 200,000 people at an estimate. 200,000 people versus the 3 or 4 Westerners that have been beheaded is nothing, is it? When it comes to a death toll,
that's what drives home the message to the American people. It's an adage in television news: a million people dead in Asia is equal to 1 person dead in your country is equal to your dog dying.
That's right. And look at the way it was done, a beheading. We don't do that in the West. It is so gross, so personal. And here they are, up in our faces, showing us that they can do it to us.
And they got to fight, and now we have escalated our fight because of it. Let's turn now to Allan Topol. Allan, talk to me a little bit about the humanitarian crisis that this has sparked. We have seen a large number of refugees flooding over the border into Turkiye and regions beyond.
I think the thing continues to unfold and develop, and I think there are going to be many more refugees, unfortunately, because we're not moving up on it. One thing we could do, for example, the American government could do is institute the no-fly zone. I mean, unquestionably, ISIL is causing a lot of the refugees, but let's not forget the Syrian government is bombing towns night and day. They're the ones that are using the barrel bombs with the nails that are exploding and causing untoward damage. We could impose that as well. I mean, the refugees are going to continue to stream unless we do something to attack it at the source. And I really think that a no-fly zone would help enormously. I mean, let's not forget Assad is the one that initiated this problem. He can't get a free walk on this, and we have to take action against him at the same time that we're moving against ISIL.
Okay, Allan, you make an important point. I'm going to have Bill Rosenberg pick up on this a little bit. The people of Syria who are caught in the middle of this conflict are caught now between 3 sides: the Assad regime, the rebels, and also ISIL. It's created a triangulation, if you will, of disaster.
Well, I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that this whole region is sort of multifaceted. There are so many sides to this. And the guest from Washington makes an excellent point. One of the other points, though, is that Assad was using chemical weapons and on his own people, something that Saddam Hussein was doing. Somehow we were able to coerce him not to do that and even to agree to get rid of his chemical weapons with American assistance. So that bought Assad some time. He's been playing a calculated game, almost the same way that Saddam Hussein did in Iraq, of giving small concessions, making arrangements, so he retains his power. And ultimately, the United States is going to have to decide what it's going to do. With a change in tone in terms of public opinion, though, in the United States, I think we may be facing a situation where the U.S. is going to do even more. And I think that's where the tide will turn really against Assad.
Jackie, talk to me a little bit about the images that we see in Turkey of refugee camps, the people who have come over the border, some of the other refugees who are hiding out in Kurdish areas seeking peace and shelter. They're powerful images, and they too will help spark an American response and a response from others in the world.
That's right. You see, it's kind of a blessing and a curse that America is so isolated. We don't have to get involved. However, when we see those video images coming over, it's a personal image. We see children, we see these poor women, we see these horrible deprivations that they're going through, just looking to provide themselves with their basic needs. And they can't, they've got to run. Well, it's in our homes now. It's on our computer screens. It's in our telephones. We cannot turn a blind eye and ignore it. And I do believe that is why, in the span of 1 year, Americans now, 52%, want to get involved, when a year ago, this was anathema.
Absolutely. Allan Topol in Washington, D.C. Let me ask you about this. Most Muslim countries, virtually all, are denouncing the ISIL terrorists and militants, and they're hesitant, however, to get involved militarily. Is there a peaceful solution to this mess in Iraq and Syria as far as ISIL/ISIS goes?
Unfortunately, there isn't, because deeply at the heart of the problem in the Middle East, the entire Middle East problem, the major problem is the conflict between Sunnis and Shiites in the Muslim world. And that's the underpinning for everything that's going on. That's a problem and a conflict that's been raging since the death of Muhammad. It's a conflict that's going to continue. It pits Saudi Arabia against Iran. It pits Assad against the Sunnis in his own country. And that's going to continue regardless. And so with that complication, which is not going to go away, you play off different things. The Saudis are involved. They're moderate, supposedly, next to ISIL, but they're both Sunnis. But there's a conflict there. They're going to fight a little bit, but kind of reluctantly, because they're going against another Sunni force. And at the end of the day, they hate and fear Iran and the Shiites more than they do ISIL, and that's at the heart of it. Granted, they fear both. They're worried about both. ISIL could unseat the regime. But let's never forget that the heart of every conflict in the Middle East right now is the conflict between Shiites and Sunnis.
Interesting point. Bill, let me bring it over to you for a second. Do the countries, legitimate governments in the Middle East and Northern Africa want American involvement? Do they want America more involved than it is now?
I think it depends on which country it is, but I think in many ways we're looked as the Hessians of the Revolutionary War in the United States. They like us to be the ones that fight, like us to be the ones that spend our own wealth, and not only in dollars, but in lives as well. I think the reality that we're facing over there is that there are many different sides and many different issues, many coming from many different perspectives. One of the things we haven't even mentioned is that for the past 2 years, while they're now going and streaming across the border into Turkey, many of the refugees, they've been streaming across the border into Jordan, and we don't even talk about Jordan. Okay, so what happens is so many of these countries are really trying to figure out where they need to be positioned in terms of what they're going to do, what they're going to provide in terms of aid. And it's a very difficult situation because many of these regimes are very tenuous in their own power structure as well.
I'm going to hold you there. Final thought from Jackie about the ISIL situation.
What we've got to do is not only take out ISIL, and I say that with a lot of reservation. We had a gentleman on the show once from the organization Win Without War. And hopefully we can do that, but it doesn't look like we can do anything but, unfortunately, use force in the situation. We've got to take out ISIL, and we really have to seriously consider removing Assad, because that's where all this terrorism is growing from, in Syria.
And let's talk to Allan Topol quickly. 10 seconds, Allan. What is your final thought?
Final thought is along the lines of the last speaker. We've got to worry about Assad at the same time that we're taking care of ISIL. One can't exist without the other. We've got to do both of them. They're both very important.
All right. Thank you so much for that final thought there. When we come back, a death from Ebola in the United States is shaking up America and its response. More on that after this.